Claire Graves came up with a slightly different and more inclusive model that became called spiral dynamics later on. And what Graves said was that rather than being a triangle, it's more of a spiral, that as we learn, as we become more complex in our thinking and our worldview, we can take in more, and we actually, rather than going to kind of a point of self-actualization where everyone would look very similar, we actually become very much more diverse as we go along. And the model has been proven out over the years. Don Beck and Chris Cowan expanded on it, and they've done work with spiral dynamics in Ireland, in resolving the conflict there, in South Africa, in a number of different places. This model has been applied. And I actually was trained in it in about 2003. I was sent by the then Religious Science International Board of Directors to be trained in it, and we presented the model to all of the ministers in our movement at that time. And it's something I use all the time. Now, we're just going to look at a slice of it, but I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of how this works. And the purpose of this really is to let you get a sense of one of the essential natures of being human is that we're developmental beings. We grow in developmental stages that are identifiable from, you'll be aware of the physical stages of childhood and adolescence and adulthood and so forth. We also have emotional stages of growth that Erik Erikson wrote about back in the 1940s and 50s. We have intellectual stages of growth where the brain changes over time. And spiral dynamics is a model that looks at two things. It looks at complexity of thought and the value systems that go along with that, because what Graves discovered, and all he did to develop the model, was hand people a 3x5 index card with a question on it. And the question was, what does a psychologically healthy person look like? Because like Maslow, he was one of the first to look at positive psychology, because up to that point, all of the psychological studies were on prisoners and people in mental asylums and college graduate students. Because that's who they could get their hands on to study, basically. And Maslow and Graves began to wonder, well, gee, we know a lot about pathology. We don't know a lot about healthy people. So as he began to get these cards in, and over the years he got hundreds of thousands of them, and he began to look at them, they began to sort into different levels. He calls them levels of existence. And he identified 8 levels of existence that were currently going on the planet today that had evolved over time, that back, if you go back into ancient human history, there was only one level. And then a second one emerged, and a third one emerged, and so forth. And I'll talk about that as we go forward. So you have a level of existence, which is how you are in terms of how you look at the world, and that would match what he called living conditions. So the living conditions and the level of existence need to match in terms of levels of complexity, or you're out of whack. You know, it doesn't work. An example might be when the Industrial Revolution happened and so many people migrated from farms into the cities and began to work in factories. That required a different level of complexity in how you looked at the world in order to do that successfully. And some people made that transition and some didn't. And the people that didn't make the transition had a very hard time in terms of making a living, in terms of understanding how the world works, and so forth. So we're going to talk about each of these levels and what they look like. And I'm going to talk about it today pretty much in terms of what spirituality looks like at each of those levels. Now, I want to point out it's not better to be at a higher level than a lower level unless the world around you is at the higher level and you're at the lower level. So as long as you're in a place where your living conditions and your level of existence match, your life will pretty well work. Okay? And nobody is at one level. Everybody's at all the levels, but we tend to have a center of gravity where we function at any given time that tends to be kind of overlapping 1, 2, or 3 levels. So you're kind of like nobody's at only one, we're at many. Okay, and you'll see how this works. And you can apply the model to one individual or the whole human race or any subset in between. So you could apply the model in an organization or in a nation or whatever. So let's just take a look. They use colors, by the way, and the colors don't have any symbolic value. These were scientists that assigned the colors, and they just made them up. But in general, because there are people who think, well, they missed an opportunity to be symbolic, but they just. So every level, and the spiral gets bigger as more complex. Every level represents an exponential degree of complexity above all the levels below it. So the lowest level is beige, very, very simple. Purple is more complex. It's more complex than beige. Red is more complex than purple and beige combined, and so forth. And they also, every other one, they have the warmer colors, the beige, red, orange, yellow, and coral, are individualistic levels. And the cooler colors, purple, blue, green, and turquoise, tend to be communal, where we actually change as we evolve from an individual focus to a communal focus, back to an individual focus, back to a communal focus. And that's reflected in how spirituality shows up. So first tier is the first 6 levels up to green, and second tier is above that. So the first tier levels of existence, they represent levels of human existence which have predominated until today. It's estimated somewhere between 95 and 98% of the world functions at these first 6 levels. Very small percentage is moved into second tier. We'll talk about that later. The first tier, all 6 of the first tier levels have one thing in common, the viewpoint that says, if everyone else doesn't agree with me or think the way I think, we're all doomed. And each of the levels will have a different way of dealing with that, to try to convince you to be like them. One level will conquer you, another level might try to buy you out, another level will love you into compliance. But it's all coming from this same basic idea. It's a fear-based consciousness that the rest of the world is not agreeing with me, therefore they're wrong and in trouble. And if the whole world's in trouble, I'm in trouble. Okay, so this shows up in spirituality as a desire to convert people to your way of thinking or your way of believing. So it's fear-based first. Okay, the first level, beige, and beige you don't see much of in the world today. It's basically very basic instinctual self. You see it in newborns, a newborn child. You see it in people that may have severe dementia or Alzheimer's. There's no sense of self. There's no capacity for complexity. This was human beings maybe for the first 1,000,000 years or so of proto-human existence, where they could form loose bands to hunt together, but there was no sense of any community or any culture or anything like that. Okay, so newborns, primitive man, and elderly dementia. So you don't really see beige. If you were at beige, you couldn't function in the world. You couldn't operate a checkbook. You couldn't drive a car. You couldn't do anything like that. The second level that emerged, and this emerged, they say, about 50 to 40,000 years ago, is purple or tribal. This is a tribal consciousness. And some of the traits of this level, it's magical, animistic. Everything is infused with spirits. Okay, blessings, curses, and spells. Ethnic tribal culture. Big focus on ancestors and that bind to the tribe. You see this where you see it today in voodoo curses, blood oaths, good luck charms, gangs, athletic teams, religious ritual, New Age spirituality, belief in angels. This is your love of ritual, your love of magic, things like that represent a purple level of consciousness, a tribal level of consciousness. And this is just some ways that shows up. Okay, and you probably, everything from Stonehenge to primitive tribal kinds of religions, that still aspects of it continue to exist. When we get together and meditate and pray, that's kind of a purple function. When you have a wedding ceremony or something like that, the planting of the tree yesterday had elements of that energy within it. Okay, and by the way, as you move up and you evolve into higher levels, you keep traces of the previous ones continue to be active in you. They're just not dominant anymore. So when they go into the rainforest in Brazil and they find people living at purple, these, the tribes still exist as a predominant way of living, you have these incredible clashes with modern civilization coming in, and the tribes rarely survive that because they don't have the level of complexity that allows them to move through it. So religion at this level is very primitive, shamanistic, sacrifice, a lot of blood sacrifice in certain areas of this level of religion, and so forth. There's some more examples. Gangs, the tattoos and the colors, good luck charms, like a rabbit's foot, which isn't very lucky for the rabbit, I found. Physical markings, and some people might call mutilation and things like that, are at the tribal level. And many of the modern religions have a lot of elements of that purple within them. Okay. What emerged next, about 15,000 years ago, is called red or powered gods. This is an individualistic level. It's assert self to dominate others. This is where some individuals who were sitting around in the tribe, and you're saying, you know what? The tribe just is really driving me crazy. I've got all this energy I want to express, and the tribe's holding me back. And they would break free. And this was like Attila the Hun and things like that. Putin operates pretty much at a red level. Red is all about saving face. Okay, so they will do anything to save face. How they look to the world is very important. Red has very little, if any, regret about anything. Now, this is in an individual. It's the terrible twos. Okay, if you're a parent, if you were, you don't remember your own terrible twos probably, but your parents do. And this is where you separate out, in a sense. You begin to separate from mom and dad, and the number one word of the terrible twos is what? No, right? Okay, well, you see that in human cultures too. Red can be very destructive. A lot of the world is at red-purple. There's a tribal element, but the red overrides it. You see that throughout the Middle East. You see it in Africa. You see it in Latin America. You see it in South Central in the gangs, where it's a combination of purple and red. Okay, so some examples. Street gangs and youth, in places where they're militarized. Okay, there's Vlad. Primitive red pre-traditional religion has a lot of symbology like this, a lot of fertility things and so forth about, bringing more prosperity and food and things like that. Okay. Red is not really honored and respected in most cultures, especially in the modern West. But we all have to go through the red stage. Most of us go through it between the ages of 2 and kindergarten. And kindergarten becomes the influence to bring us back into a more traditional controlled place, which is blue, the next level. Blue emerged about 4,000 years ago. It's called the Moses consciousness. Conformist rule, stability and order. The world has meaning and purpose. All-powerful order or other, and you're supposed to find out what the authority is and obey it. Okay? Conformity is valued. Absolute right and wrong. Punishments are severe in blue. And blue is what built the modern world. Built huge institutions, bureaucracies, city-states. All the functions that allow us to live in very large groups come from this blue consciousness. So we're seeing Puritan America, codes of chivalry and honor, charitable good deeds, institutions like the FBI, Islamic and other, all fundamentalism is pretty much at this level, where it's an absolute right or wrong, my way or the highway kind of a religion. Boys and Girl Scouts, moral majority. The isms are at blue. Patriotism, nationalism, communism, fascism, they're all at blue. Socialism. Let's see. Orthodox Western religion primarily functions here, and some environmentalists are at blue. The Vatican pretty much settled at blue, and the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, is a fairly significant blue-based structure in the United States. Gives you a lot of structure, tells you how to live your life. Don't step outside the bounds. Okay. Now, if you're a baby boomer, and I see some of you are, you grew up in this kind of a society. Frank Capra movies, It's a Wonderful Life, all that kind of stuff where, it was all about honor your nation and honor your parents and make sure you support the various institutions. Okay, so this is some examples of blue. The folks that flew into the towers at 9/11 were functioning primarily at blue. You might think, well, that's red. No, red could never design something that complicated in terms of the plot to do that. Really, complexity is what comes first. See, what Graves found, very fascinating. He had no expectation of this. As you get more complex in your thinking, your values change. And you're not even aware that they do. And so what happened, blue is all about values of tradition, of family, of institutional things that, there is a God, the whole thing about there is a God, literalism of the Bible, all that kind of stuff is a blue level function. And it can be a wonderful level. They're all positive and negative. They all have their both. But what happens is now the world is outgrowing blue, or at least the Western industrialized world. So blue is seen primarily in fundamentalist levels. It's seen in the liberal Christian churches that are decreasing in size. The Methodists are closing an average of a church a day in the United States. They have 38,000, so it's going to take a while. But populations in those traditional liberal, Lutheran and Methodist and Presbyterian are declining. Mainstream Catholicism is declining as well, but Catholicism is booming in Asia, in parts of Southeast Asia, in Africa, where cultures are just coming into blue. See? So that's where the church is spreading. One of the reasons you have a Latin American Pope was the recognition of the growth in that part of the world. So you have this kind of an absolutist viewpoint. And that can be about religion, or it can be about patriotism. It can be about anything. It can be about the who rules in the family. Quite often, I'll wait for that, but let's see. So this is some other ways blue shows up. The Buddhist monks that burned themselves during the Vietnam War, and that's happening again now in Tibet. That's blue. That's saying absolutely this is the way it has to be. This guy, this is an interesting thing. He was putting clothes on animals so they wouldn't be naked, because at blue level you should wear clothes. Homosexuals are gay, which I think is very funny. This is a barbecue that's made like a gun. Okay, so in politics, we see blue show up as absolutism regarding things like immigration, things like the Second Amendment, where there's no room for conversation. It's not right. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just that the container for the values is, this is the way it is. You can't disagree or argue with it. Period. There's no room for a conversation. Okay. Blue in relationships, very traditional. This is kind of cute. It's support traditional marriage because your daughter is worth at least 4 goats and a camel. That would actually be purple. Okay. The stand by your man thing that came up, remember when Hillary made the comment one time on 60 Minutes, she wasn't a stand by your man kind of wife, and so there was a strong reaction from the center of the country where blue values are very strong. And a typical blue wedding. Yeah. Okay, so we're up to here. 50% of the world population at blue or below in terms of complexity, in terms of that's where their center of gravity is. Okay, 50% of the world population. Next one is orange, level 5. We're still in first tier, so we're still in fear-based consciousness. This is scientific achievement. Rationality is honored. This began at the time of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, about 400 years ago. Meaning is taken in individualistic terms. The world is a rational and well-oiled machine that can be figured out through scientific discovery. Okay, achievement-oriented, materialistic gains. It's a lot about status. Winners get the perks. Where you see this today, the Enlightenment, the Ayn Rand, her philosophy, Wall Street, emerging middle classes, the Cold War, fashion industry, liberal self-interest, prosperity classes, using the law to get what you want within our own teaching as an orange level container or worldview. So some of the things you see in orange, lots of the Tony Robbins brand of self-help. It's all about make your life better, get your soulmate, get rich, get your own private island, that kind of thing. Okay, the Donald is, his hair is orange, for God's sake. He's like the poster child of orange. Okay, and if you can't read this, it says, we serve vegetarians, just tell us how you'd like them prepared. Okay. This is spirituality at Orange. It's the mega church. Rick Warren, purpose-driven life. If you go to Saddleback Church, Rick Warren's church, which has 20 or 30,000 members, and you walk in, it's like a shopping mall. They're selling everything. It makes the well-to-do suburban lifestyle fit with biblical teaching. See, you never hear about the camel going through the eye of the needle at Saddleback. Because they know they live in Orange County. It's a very wealthy, very conservative area. So it's a conservative teaching, but it's couched in what's called the prosperity gospel, which has arisen as part of the megachurch movement. Okay, you have Joel Osteen, and of course they just got robbed of $600,000 last week in a burglary. It's okay, they were insured. This is a typical kind of in a typical week, more than 5 million people attend megachurches in America. Okay, it's a very conservative lesson. It's pretty much a blue lesson, but it's tailored for an orange consciousness. You don't see megachurches in New England, kind of interesting. The Book of Mormon, the play, okay, which is a satire of the Mormon teaching, but it's very irreverent. So what happens at Orange is you begin to become relativistic. It's not absolute right or wrong. Orange will do business with anyone. When orange predominates, there's no war because they've got business ties with everyone. See, that's why we're not going to have war with China. China's too involved economically around the world. The People's Republic of China army isn't going anywhere. They'll protect their own land, but they're not going. They might go into Japan, but that's very unlikely. Because at that orange level, which represents the transition out of the heavy blue communistic state into a relative capitalistic state, and the folks running China are at orange. It's kind of, most of the people are at purple and red. It's very interesting. So so a lot of people come into religious science from an orange place. Okay, where are the prosperity classes? Where are the classes on relationships? Where are the classes on how to manifest and use the law? And that's fine. Again, this is all nothing, not saying good, bad, or indifferent, but that's when people become interested in that kind of stuff, when they are at that orange level. We don't get a lot of people at blue. What we have is people at blue that say we shouldn't teach anything but Ernest Holmes. I call them the religious science Amish. That time stopped in 1960 when Ernest died, when the founder died. We should only teach what the founder taught. There are people in our movement, very prominent people in some cases, that say that's it. If it wasn't taught by him, we shouldn't teach it. See, that's a worldview. It's coming from a container at a level of existence that we would label as blue or traditional mindset. Orange is modernism. Okay? A lot of people leave religion at Orange because in the West, the three main religions, their God has stayed at a blue level. They don't have an orange Jesus. You could have an orange Jesus, in terms of the value system and showing how Jesus, there's biblical precedent, but most of the religious organizations haven't really done that, except for some of the mega churches who are generally not affiliated with any of the major denominations. See, it's kind of an interesting dynamic of how it plays out. Orange in relationship, very, very showy weddings. Okay, lots of money goes into the wedding because your status and so forth is very important. And divorce is like part of the deal. It's expected. See, this is where blue is like condemning the orange value system because they see it not as a different set of values, but as no values or bad values. But in reality, it's an evolutionary thing. Okay, the reason the divorce rate has gone up is modernism has permeated the culture since about the 1940s to 50s, coming out of World War II in our country. This says, do you promise to love and cherish each other until it's inconvenient, or you're tired of it, or somebody more exciting comes along, or it's just not fun anymore? Legally, we call this irreconcilable differences. Okay. Okay, so now we're to here. Okay, you're up to about 80% of the planet. Okay, orange dominates in American corporate culture. Government's about split between orange and blue. You can see that. You can see the way those dynamics work out in trying to get legislation passed, and so forth. Level 6, green, sensitive self. It's about harmony and love. It's a communal level. Ecological sensitivity. Green does not like hierarchy. You're not the boss of me at green. Okay. Feelings and caring supersede rationality. It's more important as a value that people feel good about something than we necessarily get what we necessarily meet the goal. Liberal bonding and linking relationships, very complex level of being. You're able to see a whole lot of systemic things going on. You're able to appreciate that we're connected to the people in the Ukraine around the planet. At blue, not so much, unless you had relatives there. See? But at green, you're able to become more of a global citizen. Very important to make decisions by consensus, that everyone agree. A lot of processing before the decision is made. Every voice must be heard. If someone isn't here, we probably should wait and cancel the meeting and do it again next month because someone isn't here. Okay? Where you see that, Center for Spiritual Living. It's the predominant meme, or V-meme, it's a level of existence in our movement as a whole. Canadian healthcare, you know, where everybody gets healthcare. Multiculturalism is a function of this level. Humanistic psychology. Liberation theology, which all the people in liberation theology, by the way, were excommunicated from the church. That's Matthew Fox and Andrew Harvey and people like that. Diversity movements. Political correctness is in green because you shouldn't say anything that upsets someone else. The U.S. nonprofit sector, except for political nonprofits, is the dominion of green right now. People leave the corporate rat race and go start a nonprofit in record numbers, by the way, because green is also called the cultural creatives. It's about 25 to 28% of North America fall into this level of existence. So, concern about the planet. People like Deepak, Marianne Williamson's running a green campaign. There isn't really, the only other green person that really has been elected so far is Dennis Kucinich, and he's out now, so there isn't anyone at that level in Congress or in the Senate right now. Greenpeace, a lot of the environmental movement, although Greenpeace has a healthy dose of blue because they'll sink your ship if you're violating their thing, right? Warning, it tends to be indecisive. It's a postmodernism is what it equates to. Coexisting across different religious faiths, the interfaith movement, Parliament of World Religions, this represents New Ageism, Center for Spiritual Living Unity, New Thought is centered primarily at green with a lot of orange. So our business meetings largely run at green, consensus, lots of people sitting in circles with stickies and pads and writing down things and going up and talking about them. And a lot of people centered at orange in the back of the room going, make a goddamn decision already. That's kind of that's one of the major dynamics in our movement right now. And the folks at Orange often have the biggest churches because they're about numbers and status and, prosperity and things. Green's about, let's just look into each other's eyes for a minute. I see you. Right? And that's really nice. It feels good, And if you're at Green, it's like, of course, that's the only way to be. See? So I said, now each of these here's Green in relationship, non-traditional weddings, okay, and same sex. Same sex is like a no-brainer at Green. At Blue, it's like no way, because there's no authority for it. See, Blue needs an authority for it. If there isn't an authority, it's like they'll say, what's the authority to do that? And for many folks at Blue in our culture, it's the Bible is the authority. And if it's not there, then no. End of conversation. No, let's talk. Green says, let's talk about it. Let's form a little working group. And no, there's nothing to talk about. It's not there. You can't make it be there. We're done. See, and that's a huge issue in our politics, in our social realm today, of these different levels showing up. See, it's the first time on the planet we've had this many levels coexisting. See? So, there's ways of being in a level. And there's primarily two. You can be open, which means you could be at any level on the spiral and be open to listening to other ideas. Not that you're going to agree with them, but you'll listen to them. Or you can be arrested, which means you can be kind of open down to really not open at all. Okay, so there can be folks at purple or red that are very open to listening to other points of view and listening to the other levels of existence talk, but they're not necessarily going to agree with them, but that's okay. Live and let live. Kind of a thing. And there are others who say, no, you're wrong. I won't be around you. Okay. So the current Pope, he's at Blue. Don't kid yourself. But he's open. He's open to different ways of looking. He's even say things like, who am I to judge? I'm not changing any rules, but who am I to judge? Right? The judgment's already done for me by the authority, which is Scripture. I can't change Scripture, but I can say personally I'm open, whereas the previous Pope was not open in his style, in his way of thinking and being. Okay? You're not going to see a whole lot of difference in terms of how the church governs itself. It might be more kinder, gentler, open, but it's not going to say ordain women and things like that, because there's no authority for it. And Blue has to have the authority from beyond themselves in order to make a significant change. Okay, real quick. Second tier, I'm just going to give you a little splash of this. Second tier, basically you move from a fear-based consciousness to what I would call an empowered or a love-based consciousness. Second tier, the big difference is there's diminished ego needs. People who are centered at second tier are not interested in, they don't take things personally. They're not, if you disagree with them, it's like, oh, great, let's have a conversation. This is great. You attack my ideas all you want. I would never consider you're attacking me. See? Little energy goes to protecting feelings because their identity is not wrapped up in necessarily what they believe. Move from fear-based consciousness to, say, love-based, and comfortable with self, comfortable with diversity. Okay. Yellow, which is an individualistic level, the first one to emerge, comes out of green. There's a huge chasm. Usually what we talk about is something has to break for you to go to second tier. You have to break out of the restrictive fear-based consciousness, and usually that requires something cathartic. Graves called it a huge chasm between the green level and the yellow level. Much more profound than between any other two levels. So yellow is independent, high self-worth, integrative consciousness, very complex in terms of capacity to see how things operate and how the future is going to unfold. Flexibility, spontaneity, functionality, differences integrated into interdependent natural flows. Egalitarianism is valued like at green, but also with natural degrees of excellence. See, at yellow, they'll recognize some people are better at some things than others. At green, no, we're all the same. Knowledge and competence should supersede rank, power, status, or group. And everything can be questioned. Okay. So who's functioning at yellow? People like Gene Houston, Ken Wilber, Andrew Weil, the medical doctor that kind of became more of a philosopher. People like Bill Gates, Bono, the late Steve Jobs. The European Union is actually a second-tier model, which is why they're having so much trouble with it. Not enough people at second tier to operate it. But doing away essentially with national borders, you imagine that at blue. You can't. It wouldn't happen. See? And then turquoise is the highest level that they've really measured. It's again communal, very holistic worldview, global community, unites feeling with knowledge. Turquoise essentially, and this is the folks that developed the model said, in order to be a turquoise, you have to be highly spiritual. It's an essential component of this level. And the folks that created the model said, we're not there, we're orange. We know that, but the research shows that it's a very high level. So folks like the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, Thich Nhat Hanh, Barbara Marx Hubbard, these folks that will generally work in community to a large extent, and they tend to see holistic and integrative connection between anything, and almost a total disregard for self as needing any kind of defense. You're up there. I'm next. No, I'm next. So you have the yellow and the turquoise, incredibly complex. But see the colors go all the way up on the side in the model. That's to represent that no matter where you are, you've still got elements of purple, you've still got elements of red, and you can't skip a step in your own development, by the way. You have to go through it all. So once you understand the model, you can kind of see, well, I kind of see where I am primarily, but it's not uncommon, say, for someone to be orange in their professional life and blue at home as a center of gravity. You know, like at work, you do what you have to do at work to get the business. At home, my teenage daughter better follow the rules. See, there's an absolute right and wrong way to be. But you're more relativistic in the world of work, maybe. You could be orange and green, although that's a tough one because the value systems are so different. But what happens is people at orange begin to evolve, and it kind of happens without your knowing it. You begin to evolve into the next level because it's around you, and you just kind of get upset because what happens is what used to work doesn't work anymore. And you're in a place of struggle. There's a whole change model that goes with this, and we don't have time to talk about. But it basically, you find that my life isn't working the way it used to, and I have to move into another level of being that's there for me. It's inside me. But until I find my way there, I'm going to be in a place of struggle and disconnect. My life may seem chaotic and breaking down. I may have health issues. I may have all kinds of relationship issues and things like that. That usually means you're in a place of change. And probably most people at any given time are centered between two levels, which is a place of kind of, I don't know what's going on. Kind of an interesting process. So what this means spiritually is that, in terms of if I'm in a place that's blue that works for me, I need to have a religion or a spirituality that's at that level in order for me to connect and really get something from it. If I'm at red, I need to find my way into a blue system that will help me to move into that next level. It'll be more complicated than I'm used to initially. That's one way you can tell it's an advance rather than a retreat, is it's more complicated than what you were used to. And we find that whole cultures are moving into greater and greater complexity. And this says more about the world situation than any other factor, more than religion, because the Middle East is not about religion, it's about culture. Israel, which was created in a sense out of whole cloth in the 1940s, was like putting a blue-orange society in the middle of a purple-red landscape. And why is that landscape purple-red in the Arabic countries? Because for 300 years, when they were ruled by the Ottoman Empire, that was illegal for Arab men to be educated, or women. So they went from being the peak civilization on the planet before the Crusades to becoming basically purple-red, and now they're trying to work their way back into some semblance of development. You have 120 million young men in the Arab world who are uneducated. If they can't get married and have a family and buy a home, they're going to be trouble. But if there's enough of an economy there for them to do that, then what happens? They settle down. We know that this model tells us that when individual income hits $3,100 a year equivalent, internal violence ceases. If it hits $21,000, you can buy a home and live with your family. External violence ceases. See, it's all about how do we manage our complexity? How do we manage and recognize the value systems that arise out of it? So when you're having a conversation with your fundamentalist Christian relatives or friends, don't look to the religion so much. Look to the level that's speaking. Now, another thing the model says, that Graves said, that people that are at a more highly complex level have a duty to take responsibility for the quality of the communication with someone who's operating at a less complex level. Because you can see what's going on where they can't. And this teaching is one where you get a lot of pretty aware people in this teaching that have that capacity to look at things and see how they unfold in a more complex way, that understand themselves more deeply in a more complex way. It gives us an incredible advantage, not just us in this teaching, but people that are at that level, those levels of awareness, gives you an incredible advantage to do something positive in your life, with your life, through your life. So this model is just one way of looking at that. I think it's a very powerful way and a very positive way, but it's something that more and more of our centers in Dallas, by the way, the Center for Spiritual Living Dallas, before you become a member, you take a test to see where you are in spiral dynamics. And they have classes and to help people understand the model more fully. And when they run their meetings, they try to operate from the highest vibrational level they can. Because the advantage of knowing what the higher levels are lets you know where you're headed. And the more you choose to grow, the more you know what kind of thing you can grow into. And generally, it's greater complexity. All evolution moves to greater complexity and a greater capacity for acceptance and recognition of others. The lower I am on the vibrational level, the lower I am on the spiral, the less tolerance I'll have for differences because I'm afraid of them. See? So what we have going on in Crimea right now is a purple, red, blue situation with a smattering of orange, the oligarchs, and all the people at the higher vibrational levels are trying to manipulate the whole thing to their own advantage, which is what you do. And the folks in the middle, unless they begin to realize their own potential and honor, in many cases, if you're a purple red, you need to honor your traditions more fully, so that gives you the strength to carry on. Otherwise, you get conquered. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Okay, so I just shared this with you. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about the model in terms of cultural development as a group, but this is about how spirituality looks, and it does change at all these different levels. And the old blue, United States, North America is moving out of blue. It's still here in many ways, but we're moving out of it. And the thing is, the new models aren't in place yet for what we're moving into. We're creating it as we go. So thank you, and namaste.